Hello, and welcome to the No Bad Questions podcast, where I try to learn in a conversational manner by sitting down with people who have interesting careers, important lessons to tell, or inspiring stories. I hope that you learn something too. If you want to support the podcast, please follow or subscribe on your platform of choice. You can also like or comment to boost the algorithms or share out to your network to make sure it gets more views. But ultimately, and what I hope you choose to do, is listen to the very end. With that, we'll start today's podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the No Bad Questions podcast. My guest this week is Terry Stolle. Terry is the managing partner and head of the civil litigation group at Thompson, Dunlap, and Heydinger Limited, known simply as TDH Law. Terry specializes in complex construction, commercial, and agricultural litigation. Terry has been chief counsel in hundreds of lawsuits spanning more than 2 decades. TDH Law has 6 offices in 3 counties in west central Ohio. They offer a wide variety of services, including litigation, commercial transactions, business consulting, real estate, domestic relations, and estate planning and probate matters. Terry, I know time is money for a lawyer. Thanks for being here with me.
Yeah, you're welcome, David. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I just kind of, with the time constraints we have today, I want to get into a couple core tips for people about lawyers and break down some Hollywood myths if we have time, and then get into a couple bigger picture things. So we'll see how the time goes. But the first up is a very serious question, which is, what's with all the lawyer hate jokes out there in the world? Like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Hook with Robin Williams. You know, he says, "I'm a lawyer," and the Lost Boys all go, "Kill the lawyer!" And a very quotable but not that great movie from the Sylvester Stallone movie from the 90s, Demolition Man. They get in the future and they abolished all lawyers, so the justice system's so much better. And what's with all the lawyer hate?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and it dates back as for sure, I'm sure before, but William Shakespeare and Henry VIII wrote or said, depending on how you want to view it, the first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. So it kind of mirrors that. So it's been around a long time. I think there's probably 2 reasons. One is out of misunderstanding what lawyers do and misunderstanding the law. So I think that starts to create this angst towards lawyers. That would be one area that I believe. And then the other is probably, and the other may be well-founded, and that is, lawyers write the laws, write the rules, that being the politician side of lawyers, right. Legislators. And because of that, there's probably a lot of venom directed in that direction, right. Because any aspect of life, you're affected by those rules, regulation, laws, can't do this, don't do that type of stuff. So I think those are probably the common seeds of that general dislike or perceived dislike of lawyers, and then the lawyer jokes, which I get them all the time, and I actually enjoy them. I love when clients throw lawyer jokes at me. They're quite good, and I've heard some really good ones, actually, some of which I wouldn't even want to repeat on here.
Well, I appreciate that that breakdown, and I am not sure I knew it. Maybe the original or one of the older quotes came from Shakespeare, so that's an interesting anecdote. So, with that in mind, like you said, the lawyers write the rules and things like this. Should everybody have an attorney?
Yeah, I don't know if I would go so far as to say everyone, David, but I would say most people should have an attorney, even if it's for very routine legal matters. For example, routine legal matters, some of the most common routine legal matters that almost all lawyers, or at least small town lawyers, which I guess I would characterize myself, involve estate planning for their clients. And they can be very basic stuff. So from that standpoint, I think most people, if not all people, should have a lawyer for at least those very bare minimum type things as estate planning, will, wills, powers of attorney, perhaps living will, healthcare power of attorney. That's the most common and probably the thing that spans across most, if not all, the population.
So Terry, we said that there's some common reasons that folks might need an attorney, end of life and things like that. But how do I pick a good one? You and I are both in Western Ohio, so we're probably both familiar with the same law firm. They run lots and lots of commercials. They have an animal mascot, and they routinely say, you want the animal in reference on your side. I won't name any names, but should I just follow advertising? I mean, how do I pick a good attorney?
Yeah, I think the best method, David, is to talk to your friends and family. Ask for referrals because you're going to get the most candid information that way. And if none of your circle of friends and family can make a referral because they haven't had to deal with a lawyer, the next starting point would be to contact your local bar association. You can find the president of the local bar association, Google it or whatever, contact, and that person can be and will be a good gatekeeper because one of the things they're going to ask, what are you looking for a lawyer for? What's your problem? What's your issue? And then they'll know, all right, this person does this type of stuff, this person does that. So those would be the starting points for me. And in fact, probably the last place I would go, or all the way down to the bottom of the line, I guess I would say, is advertising. Because we all know, advertising is just a function of how much money someone spends to get their name out there. There's nothing wrong with advertising, but I would definitely use the referral method first. So that's how I would go about it.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I hadn't thought about the bar association thing. And actually that brings up an interesting question. So, in healthcare, physicians these days are so specialized. There's specialists and subspecialists, but there still remains that sort of family practitioner in the UK and wherever they call it a GP, a general practitioner. Is there an equivalent to a general practitioner in the attorney world, or are you all sort of specialists?
A true general practitioner who does everything across the board or almost everything is a dying breed. However, that does not mean that people are so specialized or they have to be so specialized. For example, in more rural type communities, like I am in here in West Central Ohio, which you're well familiar with, it lends itself to more general practitioner skill sets. Not all the way across the board of every potential area of law, but for example, my specialty, as you pointed up, is complex litigation, and there aren't any other attorneys in Logan County that do the type of work that I do where I am. That's just an example. But I also, because of my contacts locally here and things, I do consult with clients about estate planning, about probate matters, which are matters that deal with the estate of a deceased person. I deal with some general other matters that aren't just litigation, that are legal. And then because it's a client contacts that I get are all referral based or we almost do no advertising. So if I get something that's not in my area, I don't stiff arm the prospective client or the return client and say, I can't do that. I have other lawyers in my firm who we cover almost every area, but there are a few that we don't cover.
Right.
For example, bankruptcy, consumer bankruptcies. We just don't do it because in order to be in that area of practice, you have to have a lot of support staff because it's a very form-driven, document-intensive. It's type of stuff that's not my interest. That's just an example of one area we don't do. But so the bottom line is a practitioner, general practitioner across everything is almost a dead breed. But you probably wouldn't want that anyway because that type of lawyer probably is dabbling in things that he or she is not sufficiently experienced or skilled in. And that's one of the things that we have an ethical obligation as attorneys not to get involved in matters for which we either do not have sufficient skill or experience or for which we cannot devote time to develop the skill or experience because everyone has to start from somewhere. So, it doesn't mean I couldn't take for example, an antitrust case since I've never handled an antitrust case, my ethical considerations don't preclude me from doing so. But if I were going to do so, I would have to be willing and able, and I'd have to communicate to the client, I'm going to have to spend X amount of time getting up to speed in this area. Are you okay with that? And I have to actually be willing to do it.
Right.
So those are a few things that that come into play in response to your question there, David.
No, that makes sense. And then one of the other things, sort of speaking of specialties, is it seems like most lawyers like yourselves are that I've ever met, really, are, maybe I use the wrong words, but I'm going to call it a civil attorney, and that criminal is like its own breed, its own thing. And so, first of all, is that a correct perception? And second, to our point earlier about does everybody need an attorney, should everybody at least know the phone number of, I mean, nobody wants to be in a criminal matter, but maybe you have a car accident, maybe you have a this, you have a that. I mean, or do we, should we have somebody's card in our wallet or what, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay, so let me address the first part of your question, David, to help your viewers and listeners have an understanding. A civil lawsuit is individuals or businesses versus other individuals or businesses, okay? And civil lawsuits are disputes almost invariably, the end result of which gets down to money, okay? And that's the remedy. In fact, that's what courts fashion the remedies in. If you sue someone and you prevail in the end in a civil lawsuit, the judgment entry or the verdict you're going to get is a dollar amount.
Right. Okay.
There are very few exceptions to that. The one exception, the only one I can think of in a civil lawsuit that doesn't result in an award of money is a lawsuit about a contract to buy or sell real estate. If someone doesn't perform on a written contract to buy or sell real estate, there's a equitable claim called specific performance that a person can pursue. Let's say you and I enter into a contract and you're going to buy my real estate. Then I back out and say, I don't want to sell to you. I've changed my mind. You could sue me for specific performance for breach of that contract. And specific performance, you would be asking the court sitting in what we would call the court's equitable powers, you would be asking the court to order me to convey title of the real estate. And the reason that that's such a unique animal and one of the rare exceptions to an award of money is because real estate, every piece of real estate is deemed to be totally unique in the world. There's no piece of real estate like the real estate sitting out here or the real estate behind you or the real estate next to your neighbor. So, but anyway, civil lawsuits involve disputes among people and companies against each other. Criminal matters are ones where the legal system views the alleged criminal to have done something against society. Okay, and that's the criminal law, violation of the criminal laws. You know, whatever the alleged crime is, whether it be a robbery, a rape, murder, theft, whatever the crime is alleged to be, that's the type of conduct that's so reprehensible to society. It's deemed to be a crime against society. And that's why the other party to a criminal action is not another person. It's the government. It's the state versus the alleged criminal. That's why those criminal matters are styled like that. And often it is true, oftentimes those two tracks, civil litigation and criminal litigation, they're totally parallel tracks and they don't ever cross over, okay? One, the end result is freedom or not freedom, potentially, if it's bad enough. And the other, no, you're not going to go to jail if you're found to have breached a $10 million contract. There aren't debtor prisons.
Right.
You're going to get hit with a judgment against you for $10 million. That's the remedy. All right, now to the other portion. Should you carry around a card? I don't know. I suppose if you are a repeat bad actor in terms of maybe like something like drinking and driving, well, yeah, you probably should have a card, but maybe you also should get some help to stop doing that. But so I'm being a bit facetious there, but I think it would be either paranoia or you probably should work on straightening some other stuff up as opposed to being so concerned about having a lawyer's card next to you is kind of how I would answer that one, David.
No, that's fair enough. And let me ask you this: it's so in the news as of the time of this recording is Mr. Musk and Twitter, and that's not real estate, but that's a business. Do you? You're probably not familiar with the ins and outs of that case, but is that essentially like what you're talking about with the real estate, where basically Twitter sued him to say, no, you said you were going to buy it, you must buy it, and is that sort of an equivalent of the performance thing that you mentioned there, do you think?
Well, it's a good analogy to it, but the end remedy is not likely to be a court of law telling Mr. Musk, you have to go buy those shares. But they could say, you entered a contract, you breached the contract, and the measure of damages as a result of that breach is whatever, the plaintiff can prove. Him backing out of the deal or whatever the facts are, how has that caused damage? And damage, again, is the word lawyers use to equate to monetary harm.
Right.
The damages are the monetary harm. So it's analogous, but it's not likely that the court would order the specific performance. Now, I suppose that a creative plaintiff's lawyer may try to analogize the situation to real estate being totally unique, that being the shares of the company at this particular time. And so they may creatively be arguing that. I don't know. I don't, I haven't followed that case close enough, but it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. So I think you've drawn a really good comparable example to that specific performance concept.
Okay. All right. Well, good. And who knows, by the time this airs, that might all be resolved and water under the bridge or whatever. As of recently, this week, I think he's now flipping and said, no, I want to buy it, and he's not fighting it. So anyway, one other thing that's been in the news recently, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but the concept, I think it's important for people to understand this concept, both for themselves, because I know I've needed it in my professional career to understand this, as well as just to maybe understand the news, is the concept of privilege. That's the big argument with the former president in Florida, and that some of these are. Can you explain what is privilege?
Sure. So in my world, the privilege that I talk about the most is the privilege between attorney and client. And what privilege simply means is everything in that communication relationship is confidential. And it's the client's privilege, and the client can, at his or her discretion, his or her whim or decision making, can breach the privilege. If they want to go tell people what we talked about, that's the client's privilege. I can't stop that. I am not lawfully permitted, however, as an attorney, to disclose privileged information, unless, again, my client says, yeah, you can go communicate with someone else. And that privilege, the confidentiality of some relationship or by and among certain person and other persons or groups of persons is a confidential relationship. The or the information, the topical information is confidential. And that privilege is just another way of saying it's confidential, and it's protected confidential information. And it's unlawful to disclose that. So oftentimes you'll hear in political circles that there may be someone trying to get at privileged information that might be, some campaign detail or whatever. Again, that's sacrosanct in that arena and not accessible by outsiders. And of course, the reason that privilege exists is to create trust, to create situations where people can, for example, counsel or consult with their lawyer. Same type of privilege or confidentiality exists in a patient-physician relationship, and in all sorts of other relationships day to day that we all experience. With your bank, for example, your information is confidential, aka privileged. So that's what that means.
Does it stem then codified from in the American system anyway, from like the Fifth Amendment type of, the right to not say anything that might, again, we're edging into criminal matters, I guess, but that might incriminate yourself. And so in order to seek advice, you have to not incriminate, you have to feel safe. Like you said, you have to have trust. Does it stem from that to some extent?
I think there's probably some seeds there, David, from that constitutional concept, which again is more on the side of the aisle of criminal rights and things of that nature. Not all of it, of course, because you have free speech and all this other stuff. I think there's probably some seeds there. I think it probably gets back to more of, just a very fundamental concept in our Judeo-Christian society that, people should hold things in confidence and not utter them outside of the confidence of a relationship. For example, shall not bear false witness against thy neighbor. It probably has more seeds emanating from that concept of than even the constitutional. It's just it's the right thing to do in certain relationships. Yeah, we're having this discussion. Even though you and your friend are having a discussion and there might not be a legal privilege to not disclose it, there's some implied societal norm that exists that says, kind of know it's probably not right if this person told you something. Hey, I want to tell you something. I've got a problem here. To go talk to someone else. So I think it's more rooted than that.
Okay. All right. And I want to be cognizant of the time. There's so much more I'd love to ask you about the state of your industry, and I've asked several of my guests sort of career profile type questions, but I don't know that we've got a lot of time for that. So one thing I wanted to highlight that I think is good advice, it seems to me, that I've heard you give to people before is, that essentially I'm paraphrasing you here, so forgive me, to avoid you and avoid the legal system if you can. To resolve disputes without lawyers, without going to a court. Can you explain to somebody listening why you tell people that and why you feel that's true?
Yeah, I mean, first, it's rooted in a very practical concept. One is the cost associated with getting legal advice. That would be one reason I would make such a comment. Another is certain scenarios, disputes among people, for example, are best and probably best way to resolve them is among those people without escalation, because automatically you get a lawyer involved, everyone perceives it, at least everyone I've ever dealt with perceives it as escalation. And it's probably not just a perception. The matter has all of a sudden been escalated. So those are the reasons I would give that type of advice. Because once you escalate it, it's very hard to de-escalate and go back to the original status quo, if you will. And so that would be the primary reasons. I'll say this, David, this is something that resonates in my mind every day, all day about the business of lawyering. I don't get enamored about law and the laws and the process and the procedure. And the reason I don't, because the very fundamental thing that I'm doing is helping people with their problems. And I don't try to confuse and use legalese and big words and this and that when I'm dealing with clients trying to help solve their problem, because that's all they want is their problem solved.
Right.
They don't want, a bunch of big talk lawyerisms and all this stuff. They just want their problem solved. So I view it and every day try to apply this very common theme. I'm just trying to help solve a problem that you have come to me with, and you need help, and it's of some legal nature. But I've had many a client tell me, hey, I appreciate how you help solve the problem. You make things seem pretty simple and straightforward. Now, I've worked with enough other lawyers to know that that's not everyone's methodology, I guess I'll put it. And they're really into the nuances of the law and the procedural stuff and the terminology and all this. But to me, I try to filter and just help the client understand enough about what's going on and keep the client sufficiently informed about what's going on without getting bogged down in that. So, this kind of ties back in with the question you asked earlier, is what would be my advice to folks who are looking for a lawyer? And that is, as you're asking for referrals, listen to what the people say and ask some follow-up questions if you have people that are telling you, I know this person, this guy or that lady, and I know my cousin used that person. But listen to what their responses are and the information they give. Was the person ultimately relatively easy to work with under probably a duressful situation, most likely? Not all, but many of the times people are having a bad day. Right. That's why they're seeing a lawyer, and whatever the case may be. So, that to me is very important, and I would recommend that. And if I have family looking for a lawyer in another state, for example, that I'm not licensed in, those are the things that I try to help them with is, let's get to this person because I've asked around and this blah, 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 and ultimately looking for someone to help solve a problem, not to, entangle someone in such a confusing mess that they feel like the problem's not only not been solved, but it's just become worse, more complicated, whatever. So that's what I would say about that.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And, Terry, I know we're pretty much out of time, but I appreciate you giving of your time to me today.
Why don't you shoot two more questions at me, David? I'd be glad to, and then you can edit and splice and dice as you want.
Sure. Well, okay. So one thing that seems to me to be true about the lawyerly, the barrister trade is that you guys, healthcare is pretty bad about this too, still have a lot of paper. And the rest of the world is moving towards a digitization front. Do you feel like your industry is, is ripe for technology enablement, for technological revolution, or do you think that there is a value to that older school methodology and what that, because there are some advantages to that and what that brings to the table? Can you speak to a little bit about that from like a status of the industry perspective?
Yeah, I would say that, it's hard for me to be able to compare to other industries, but I would say the legal profession probably is a little slower than many industries in adapting to some of that. But I can tell you that even in, small town USA here, the things that we do, in terms of modernization and trying to, be paperless. We try, but we have to be cognizant too that 75% of our clients that in our firm at least are still, just normal everyday people. So they show up and they always show up with documents in their hands. Now it's becoming even more and more prevalent now. Of course, oftentimes we're dealing with extracting text messages off their phone that are evidentiary in nature. Emails, of course, have been around for 25, 30 years, whatever. So you're always getting those. But so there is evolution for sure. I know that many of the lawyers in my firm, especially the younger ones, they're just comfortable not even having paper documents for the most part. I am old school, and that when I'm actually reading something, I'd rather just have it in my hands and read it as opposed to scrolling. If it's something more than an email, it's some 5-10 page document, I don't want to scroll through a screen and look at it. Just not my preference. But so I think that the younger lawyers, so we're evolving that way too, and courts are as well, slowly but surely. Where things are getting less and less paper oriented and more email and sharing of documents with clerks of court that way through electronic filings and things. So we're catching up, just a little slow maybe.
Okay, so the wheels of justice move slowly, and maybe so do the wheels of judicial technological reform. So that's fair enough. And then one of the other questions that I was curious about, I read so many articles. I try to stay on top of things going on in the people resource, human resources landscape out in the world, and everybody's talking about there's a big talent shortage across industries. Is the legal profession also, suffering from, not enough people coming into the profession like a lot of other, again, you may not be able to compare across industries, but lots of industries are. There's articles being written about it. Are you guys also suffering from a lack of younger talent?
Yeah, I think we are, and I know the law school admissions would reflect that. In general, from what I've read and heard, they're down from even as recent as 15 years ago. Pretty good clip. So, the short answer is yes. And support staff wise, we're always challenged, just like almost any employer in today's post pandemic or pandemic, whatever era. So yeah, we definitely are challenged. I'll tell you this, David, in terms of being the managing partner of a 6-office, 15, 16, 17 lawyer, 35 employee type operation, which is relative small beans, but the biggest challenge that I have and my firm has, the leadership group, is not knowledge of the law. It's not legal matters. They're always challenging, but that's why we went to schools, to help solve problems and deal with challenging situations. It's not even opposing counsel on litigation matters. It's not judges or staff at courts. Biggest challenge I've been saying this for years, biggest challenge we have is human resources. It is the biggest challenge. It's not difficult clients. Heck, I've dealt with enough difficult clients that it's just, you're used to it. And so that's not the biggest challenge with the practice of law and running a relatively small law firm operation. It's human resources. And that goes across the board. Young lawyers, finding young lawyers who want to be in this type of rural type setting, who want to practice in these types of areas, to support staff, legal assistants, paralegals, receptionists, all those. So it's the biggest challenge from my experience.
That's fascinating. I wouldn't have guessed that, but on the other hand, as you're saying that, I'm thinking back to a prior episode 7, where I was talking with somebody about rural health and the challenges of rural health. And I think rural towns and counties have all of these challenges, and it makes sense that they're across other industries too. So I appreciate your perspective on the legal industry. Terry, thank you for being here. If somebody, obviously you're licensed in Ohio, but if somebody wanted your advice and counsel, if they want more info about TDH law, if they just want to reach out to you, where is a good spot to, maybe an email or LinkedIn, or where should they connect with you?
Easiest for me, David, I'm not a big social media guy. Easiest for me is my email or my cell phone. My email is tstolly@tdhlaw.com. My cell phone is 937-539-2779. I'm willing to answer questions free of charge, for the initial screen to see if they want to have an attorney-client relationship. No problem. So I encourage any of your listeners or viewers to reach out to me to go through that initial process if they're so inclined.
All right. Well, Terry Stolle, thank you so much for being with me here on No Bad Questions.
Glad to do it anytime, David. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.